Turn up the dive, feel the vibe, get ready to ignite. Untold stories in the airways, flying through the night. Experience voices, tales so bold. Streaming live, the truth unfolds. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's so I remember I. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can't hide. Aliens in the attic, UFOs in the sky. Cryptids lurking, oh my, oh my. Ghosts in the hallway, whispering your name. The paranormal, the unexplained. Become a VIP, get the inside scoop. Unlock the mysteries, be part of the group. Live streaming stories, they're talking to you. Super chats buzzing, join the group. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can hide. So if you've got the guts and you want to explore, tune into the Untold, it's what you're looking for. From aliens to ghosts and all that's unseen. Untold Radio Network, where the world's mysteries convene.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Well, greetings, all my fellow weirdos and weirdos, and welcome to Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, and as always, I'm delighted that you're joining me, whether it's live tonight, where we stream on YouTube and Facebook and X, or whether you're watching the show archived on any of those sites after the United States, or maybe you're listening to the show on one of the many podcast platforms that both Talking Weird and all the other wonderful shows on the Untold Radio Network go out on, which I also encourage you to check out if you are only a Talking Weird listener. Again, super busy week for me. MidWest WeirdFest is almost upon us, the film festival that I run in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, this year from March 6 to March 9. So I have 2 days until it's with us. And I also now include the other fest I used to run in Australia, which is a night of horror. So it's a twinplex we run in. So both festival has their own screens. And whether you like paranormal documentaries or oddbeat off-ball comedies or horror movies or thrillers or science fiction films or anything in the tent of the weird and in the tent of, creepy horror type tales, you're going to have a blast. It's the 9th year of MidWest WeirdFest and the 17th year of A Night of Horror. And we've already almost sold out the season passes to both of those festivals. So it is filling up. There's still a couple of passes left and there's still tickets, single tickets to most sessions, but we will sell out a number of sessions. I know that for sure. Last year we sold out quite a few and it's going to happen again this year. Speaking of the festival, we have a lot of fantastic filmmakers come in, which is one of the great joys of going to a film festival. It's unlike a normal cinematic experience where you just go to the Cineplex and you just watch the movie. At both MidWest WeirdFest and A Night of Horror, you also get to engage with the filmmakers themselves, both with their introductions and then their Q&As at the after party, socializing in the bar next door or in the foyer. It's a wonderful experience. It's very different to what you're probably used to experiencing unless you often go to film festivals that have a lot of the filmmakers there. And tonight, I'm going to introduce you to one of the filmmakers who is coming into the festival to screen his wonderful documentary with us. He started Afterlife Road Productions in 2017, combining his documentary filmmaking and journalism background with his passion for the paranormal. His previous work includes Afterlife, which debuted as a finalist in the 2023 Fear Faire Film Festival, and the acclaimed podcast Filming the Supernatural was listed as one of Apple's 50 most popular film TV interview shows. His new film, Dweller, directed alongside Sarah Lienard, is Afterlife Road Productions' third and most audacious film, and we're going to be playing that this year at MidWest WeirdFest. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to Talking Weird, Ben Goldman.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And before we get carried away, I do want to give a quick shout. The Untold Radio Network has the best intro song I've ever heard. I've never been so motivated and pumped up to subscribe and share this out everywhere. So kudos to you guys. That was awesome.
Oh, thank you. That's actually, I think Doug Hychek probably arranged to have that show put together. He's the head of the network, and it's his brainchild. He, of course, you're probably aware of, is the creator and the producer of Monster Quest, which is still one of the most successful paranormal cryptid shows in history, and it's still syndicated all over the place. It has a great longevity, and that's how I first met Doug, because myself and my daughter, who's now 9, back then I think she was like 3 or 4, was a massive fan of Monster Quest. So I reached out. I
remember watching that as a kid too.
Yeah, it's a great show. Speaking of great shows, man, Dweller is fantastic. I was so happy when it came across at our programming desk here at MidWest WeirdFest. It was like, this is the exact type of content we love for the festival.
Well, I was telling Sarah, who co-directed it, and Brianna, who helped make it, and Angela, my girlfriend, who also helped make it. I was telling them, this is the perfect festival to screen the film at. It screened at 2 other festivals, but this is the first one that's not only in the Midwest, but the first one we're attending. So it's the first screening that we're attending of the film. Our first time seeing it on a screen larger than our televisions, and we can't be. We're not. This is just the greatest festival. I've seen the lineup, the David Lynch tribute. Can't wait for everything. We're officially weirdos now, so that's cool.
You are part of the weird family now.
Yeah,
that's true. And I think the audience are really going to enjoy engaging with you in the Q&A as well. That's one of, as I was saying before, the great joys of the festival. And we've had some great paranormal peeps before that, who make content like you. We had the Newkirks one year. At least we had Greg Newkirk and Carl Pfeiffer come and do Hellier with us. And we had the late great Linda Godfrey. We did her the actual world premiere of her first feature film, which she directed with her son, Return to Wildcat Mountain. We had the late John Yost, whose alien abduction movie with Whitley Strieber was probably Alien Abduction Answers was probably the biggest alien abduction movie of the last decade. So we've had, I mean, I could go on and on and on. We've had an awful lot of really cool paranormal documentaries, and yours is definitely one of them. But before we're going to talk about Dweller, there's no doubt, and I've got the trailer we can play in a little bit as well. But my very good friend Bob Antone asks a question we're going to get to as well in a minute. Bob, we will come back to it. Bob's a regular guest on the show and a folklorist and a wonderful musician. He asks, what is the dweller of the threshold, or the dweller on the threshold? But maybe before we hit that question, maybe we'll get a little bit of your background and how you got into going down this path, investigating and filming these type of things.
For sure. It's a weird path to go down. And it kind of, oddly enough, happened pretty naturally. I remember my freshman orientation. I attended school at Michigan State University here in Lansing, Michigan. And at orientation, they just have a big, the hockey arena. They have all the school clubs. You want to join debate team? They have someone for a debate team. You want to join anything, air hockey, bird watching. I was ready for the weirdest clubs. I wasn't expecting a ghost club. So I was just walking around. It was packed in there. Wanted to get out as fast as I could. Wanted to just move on and just hang out with my friends. And this girl in a ghost costume pops out, full jump scare moment, hands me a card saying, "You look like you want to join the ghost club. Come to this classroom Wednesday at 9:00. I was like, you know what? Props to her. That was quite a spectacle. I'll show up. Go Green Horse.
Do you know Horace Smith or?
No, but he said, yeah, MSU. So I like,
Yeah,
I like
Horace
this
Smith
show.
is a regular. He's been on the show a couple of times. He's a regular listener. He's a great friend of mine. He's Professor Emeritus of Astronomy and Physics at Michigan State University.
Oh, heck yeah.
So there you go.
Heck yeah. Anyway, so she popped out. I was like, I'll attend. And I thought in my head, I don't want to be the first one to show up at a ghost club. I barely know anyone at a school. I'll be fashionably 5 minutes late. No one's going to be there anyways. I come in, and for context, it's a 20, 30-person classroom. It's filled to the rim with gotta be 100 students.
Wow.
Little did I know that Michigan State has one of the largest paranormal clubs in the Midwest. We were actually reached out numerous times. The contracts all sucked. We never pursued them. But when Paranormal State was trying to do a reboot a couple years, they kept reaching out to us, and we did a number of interviews with them. They kind of low-key stalked us on Facebook and would reach out every now and then, the producers of that show. But
wow.
Yeah, big prominent paranormal club. And I was like, okay, I met a couple people, and that's kind of how Afterlife Road Productions started. The couple friends I made in the club, and I was like, we do one big investigation with the club every year, but there's all these cool places around. Let's go do our own thing. And I was studying documentary film production at the time, getting my undergrad degree in that. So I started just filming our adventures, and I started posting them on YouTube, and it kind of turned into a web series. I was just filming it just to get some practice in, as a learning filmmaking. It's one thing to do the school assignments. It's another thing to film your adventures in the cemetery, on a Friday night. That's a little bit more fun, and you can do some more experimentation. There was one assignment where we had to follow someone around who was part of a school club, and they bailed on me last minute. So I just used one of my ghost videos, since technically we were in the paranormal club, and I used that for a school assignment. So, and I did get an A. So that was motivation. So I continued after graduating, and we've since, as you said in your intro, I stopped doing the web series just because we all live in different regions of the state, and it's so hard to see each other as frequently as we did, doing investigations every week, every couple days, as much as we could. And the whole grind of that whole culture is not really for me. I'd rather invest in a long form project and really go down all the rabbit holes and make some long form films and projects. So that's kind of been our focus.
It's fascinating that you were learning the craft of making film while you were also dipping your toes into paranormal research. I imagine that allows you a different insight into making this kind of content, other than a lot of people who make paranormal films or videos. And I see some of them, and some of them, quite frankly, aren't that great, who are just paranormal clubs and make and film their content. But what do you think compared to what you were taught when you were a documentary filmmaker? I mean, you were learning both, I guess, in paranormal investigating on the side and documentary filmmaking. But what do you think are some of the unique challenges as a documentarian when you're approaching the paranormal and making this kind of content?
Well, I'm my biggest challenge because I imposed two rules on myself when I was doing the web series. So the web series, kind of what I wanted out of the web series that we did in college was I wanted short form, because I'm also being trained in journalism. That's all short form content. So I wanted to kind of keep in line with what I was doing in school. And also I wanted to create stuff where if you're looking up haunted places near me, which we frequently did, when we're just driving around, I wanted someone to be able to pull up a 5-minute video and just, as they're pulling up to a cemetery, just get a quick overview of what goes on there, type of thing. So I imposed a rule on myself. We would go out on a Friday or Saturday night and film. I would get all my homework done on Friday and Saturday, leave Sunday to edit, and I would schedule for Monday morning to post. So I had to edit the whole thing in one day. So that got me really fast at editing. And I started to develop a little, some tricks that only work for me. Like, people would always ask, can you post raw footage? and I had no opposition to doing so, but I developed a craft, a specific way of filming to help me edit faster, if that makes any sense. So I could theoretically post raw footage, but I'm not always filming stuff. I'm doing things just to, some quick slates, because you can't write a slate. That's a thing that's difficult when you're out filming in a dark cemetery. You can't be writing down, scenes or notes, and your phones are often on airplane mode, if you even have cell reception. So figuring out how to like take notes and do it all quickly, because another thing with the paranormal is I learned quickly in filming this stuff, if we're going to a cemetery, paranormal activity can happen the moment you get out of the car. There's no time for setup. I have to set up in the vehicle, and then we all get out. So I'm always rolling at least audio from the second we get out of the car, because I've been burned so many times where as soon as we get out of the car, we hear a woman's voice go, "Hello?" And then we spend all night trying to find that woman, and we never find anyone because it was a ghost, and we didn't capture the ghost. Because who would think you need to start filming your movie in the car? So
Yeah, that is interesting. That is something, I suppose, with the paranormal, that it's hard to interpret, and it's hard to expect, and it's hard to coax to do it again, I'm assuming, in some ways. Like maybe if you're filming, I'm a documentarian as well, funnily enough, but maybe if you're filming an interview or you're filming somebody doing something for B-roll, and if it kind of blows, you can go, okay, can we just try that again? But you can't do that to the weird ghost voice that you heard when you were stepping out of the car into the graveyard, right?
No, they're the most uncooperative crew you can ever ask for. You can't even find them again. They come for one scene, and if you don't get your take, they're just gone.
Maybe that's a good transition now into my good friend Bob Antone's question before, because you've obviously experienced various, paranormal phenomena and various perhaps different entities, but the film that we're showing at MidWest WeirdFest, which is wonderful, is a film called Dweller, and as I pitched at the beginning, and as the show notes and the show title say, it's about an entity called the Dweller on the Threshold. And Bob Antone wanted to know what that is. So I don't know if you want to tell us first what it is, or how you discovered what it is might be a more interesting story.
I mean, the short answer is there's a great film about this concept that's premiering at the Midwest WeirdFest. No, but so the whole film is us trying to understand this. Okay, so I'll come back to this, but whenever we do events or I'm on shows like this, and I appreciate this show being asking about specific films and filmmaking craft, because most of the time it's just people asking, what's the scariest thing you've ever seen? Have you ever seen a ghost? Tell me about the scariest thing you've ever experienced. It's all the same question. And the answer is always this one crazy experience we had at this place near us called Stimson Hospital. And it took us a long time to try to figure out what it was we experienced. It was the most primal existential fear we ever experienced. And this is our most frequented paranormal location. We were the first people to investigate there, and we go every year, and for almost a decade now. So we know more than any place the spirits there, like kind of intimately. It's kind of weird to say, but we kind of know the vibe. We've been there before so many times, and we were just there chilling for a party. We weren't even filming, and something entered the hospital that was not from there. It was wrapped up in this huge existential primal fear. Like it was like something invaded the building. Like it was like an intruder. God. And it took us a long time just talking for weeks. Like, what was that? Because we didn't even know how to compartmentalize it, like how to talk about it. And then I was kicking myself. I was like, every god bleeping interview, people ask us our scariest encounter, and we don't have any footage of it because we're just chilling. But it goes into the struggles we were just talking about. And Sarah, who co-directed the film, she's a very talented poet. She writes like she's I don't even know how she does it. She's so talented. Her creative mind is beyond, you can't even conceive the stuff she comes up with. And she was just thinking, she's like, how about as we try to work through this terrifying experience we both had, what if I just kind of meditate on it a little bit? I'll start writing some poetry. And in one of her poems, she comes up with the phrase "dweller on the threshold." And at the time, she was sharing like a bunch of poems with me. So I latched onto that phrase and I'm like, that's brilliant. That would be a great name for your poetry collection. Let me just Google this and make sure no one's already taken it. You know what I mean? Little did I know that the dweller on the threshold, dweller of the threshold, guardian on the threshold, guardian of the threshold, there's so many different variations of the name, but it's permeated various theologies and belief systems for centuries. I believe it was 1842, the first written account of the dweller on the threshold in this novel by Edward Bulwer Lytton called Zanoni was actually written.
I read that back in college. I had a professor recommended I read it for something I was working on. So it was fascinating that appears in the documentary. Yeah.
You read that in college. What was it for?
It was because I was writing in my master's, which I did before my PhD. I had to do a dissertation, which I did on UFO belief, and I did a long essay. And my long essay was on a famous conspiracy book, the Memoirs of the History of Jacobinism by Abby Burrell. And because it deals with the French Revolution and because it deals with secret societies, one of my supervisors, or one of my teachers at the time, Bob Dreyer, who actually was from this part of the world, ironically, where I ended up, he said, "You need to read Zanoni, mate. You need to read Bulwer Lytton Zanoni." And I think I'd already read Lytton's The Coming Race because it's related to, inner Earth stories and the type of stuff I was dealing with in my UFO stuff. And so I read Zanoni. Yeah, it's a crazy book. And so in your documentary, like I was already aware of it. I'm like, they got it. It's in there.
Yeah. I mean, like that was when she came up with that phrase to describe what we experienced. And I was just like Googling it, just like as a joke. Like the closest thing I've read, because we were talking about like, could this just be something in our subconscious? You know what I mean? Like that's something that you got to think about. Was this subconsciously just lodged in there? Did we read Zanoni? No, we didn't. The closest thing that we knew of was like some people kind of interpret the dweller as kind of like the Carl Jung's like shadow self sort of ideology. And like we knew that, but we wouldn't know to associate the dweller with it. It kind of seemed like people were using that as like a touchstone of like, you know what this is? Okay, because the dweller is kind of like that sort of thing. Which I guess brings me to like, there's always all these interpretations throughout the centuries of the dweller. That's famous painting. There's always interpretations and it varies based on perception, on your beliefs. But I think the one thing that can be agreed upon, at least that we've kind of figured out, going down the rabbit hole, was the dweller is something that people encounter on their spiritual path, on their spiritual journey, and it's something that they need to overcome as part of the initiatory experience. Whereas in order to finish the initiation, you need to overcome this. What this is depends on interpretation, but it is what we are calling and other people call the dweller on the threshold. Some people believe it is an actual entity. Some people think it's a more metaphorical entity. Like I kind of said, like some people think it's like your shadow self that is the dweller that you need to overcome. So there's always interpretations, and that made sense to us. People also say that like you're more bound to experience the dweller in a very liminal place. We encounter this in literally a doorway in an abandoned hospital, a hospital that was known most people think like hospitals, how many people died? This hospital, the question to ask is how many people were born? People came here to be born in this hospital. It was actually, fun fact, one of the first hospitals in the state of Michigan that like required women to bathe before giving birth. Like that's a weird thing, but they were very pro cleanliness, you know, and people would travel from all over to give birth here. So this is a hospital that produced so much life. And literally in this doorway, in this abandoned hospital, we encounter something that just, when meditating on it, this phrase popped up, which actually turned out to be something much deeper and bigger than we could have ever conceived. So I knew this was something important, and we had no footage of any of it. So I decided to go back to the very place we had our most terrifying paranormal experience ever in our lives. And you know what? Most people, when they say, we're going to go back to the most terrifying place, it would cut to them walking up, scary music. Oh my God, we're going to encounter the dweller again. What's going to happen tonight? No, we leaned into the liminal aspect of it. And what we did is we just cut to my 25th birthday, which we celebrated on our return. And we were just popping champagne, having a fun time, which replicates the, you know, the fun times of before, but also there's no, you know, stronger liminal time. Quarter my life right there, celebrating as the clock struck midnight. We called out directly to the dweller. And then we also kind of paired that footage with our own self-initiation ritual that we conducted. And the amount of similarities and synchronicities that occurred, literally they mirrored each other, which was really weird to see. But yeah, that's kind of what the film is us going down this rabbit hole of like, why did this phrase dweller on the threshold come to us to describe this experience? Could it have actually been the dweller on the threshold? Let's go back and let's call out to it. And we're going to just juxtapose that footage with our self-initiation ritual, and let's see what happens.
It's a great idea for a film, and it's one of the reasons it's so effective, I think, because you take that approach. But also, it's about an entity that is central to various theosophical and occult traditions, as well as it's seeped into popular culture, which maybe we'll get to in a minute. I'm unaware of any documentary made about it before, but we have another question from Bob Antone, who's super switched on. And I know he has friends in the Hmong religion. And he says in the Hmong religion, there are gatekeepers that guard each level of heaven and hell. They dwell on the threshold between levels of the afterlife. Does this ring any truth with your research?
Yeah. Actually, I was just talking with Sarah about this. The definition of the dweller on the threshold that I think rings most accurately to me, like the one that I jive most with, is I believe it was Annie Besant who said that the dweller on the threshold is a guardian of the astral plane. So I like that definition. I am in the entity camp. I think the dweller is an entity, and I do think that's a good way to put it, that it like guards the astral plane. And I think there's many dwellers out there.
Yeah, that was interesting in your film as well. That you started to talk about dwellers, the idea that there were these multiple things, and maybe that's comes closer to a Jungian suggestion, which is in the film as well. That somehow it's, you know, our own dark, you know, shadow figure that, you know, we have to somehow encounter and perhaps overcome as we journey to the next level of spiritual enlightenment. What I also like is and you have it in the film too, is that the dweller appears in popular culture, which is ironic, of course, because as we said, Bulwer Lytton introduces it in his relatively significant mid-19th century novel Zanoni, but then it pops up again in Twin Peaks, for example, when Hawk is talking to Agent Cooper, explaining about his Native American religious tradition of the dweller on the threshold.
Mm-hmm. Imagine my shock. It was about a month or two after finishing the documentary that I was just on scrolling through streaming. I'm like, you know what? I should watch Twin Peaks finally. Never saw it. And I was like, Oh my God. I mean, I pulled that clip. The reason why was because I pulled a clip of Twin Peaks that I later discovered mentioned the dwellers. I pulled that clip and I was just like, but that was after, I was told like, hey, that's from Twin Peaks, right? So I pulled that clip and I was like, I should finally watch it. But I don't think I put this in the documentary. So behind the scenes scoop. Right before we encountered the dweller on the threshold, we found this card, like a playing card, shoved under there's two haunted spots in the Simpson Hospital. There's the main bedroom, which we encountered it, and then there's the boiler room and the morgue basement. So we were kind of going back and forth between both. And right before we encountered the dweller, and again when we tried reaching out to him, we found a Queen of Diamonds card that looked fresh, like it was just placed there. And of course, that comes up in Twin Peaks too. There's a significant card. I saw that and I was like, oh, okay. So, and the whole idea of, and also that room is nicknamed the Red Room. So that comes up. So between the Red Room and the boiler room, it's up and then it's down, and then there's Red Room, there's Queen of Diamonds, there's this concept that comes up in the show. I'm like, what is going on here? What did David Lynch tap into? And then every film festival that this freaking film is showing in, for this, it's due to very unfortunate and tragic circumstances, but every single film festival that this film is screening in has to do with something that happened. We screened in the what was it called? I'm gonna this is so bad. The festivals that I don't attend, I get mixed up because I get
I know it's
notifications.
like it's easy.
But
they start to blur when you get into.
Yeah, they do. I believe it was called the Festival of the Unseen.
I'm aware of that festival.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what it's called, the festival.
Okay, yeah.
And you guys did play there, right? Because I can remember
we
seeing
did.
the Laurel that you played there.
Good. Thank you. Too many film festival notifications. And like I said, this is the first one we're attending for Dwellers.
You chose the right one to come to, mate. You're gonna
absolutely. But during the climax of the film, when we are attempting to reach back out to the Dweller, we did a spirit box session, and we got a bunch of responses that were highly relevant to what was going on. And then we got one random word, which was Indrid. And we joked. We were like, Indrid Cold?
Uh-huh.
What does Indrid Cold have to do with any of this? And I was like, I don't know. Probably nothing. This is probably stupid, but I'll just throw it in there. There's some weirdo out there that's going to see it as an Easter egg. We'll just keep it in.
I enjoy it. I was one of those weirdos. I enjoy it.
Okay, good. And so I kept it in just for that as an Easter egg, even though it didn't really have anything to do with the Dweller. But then
it's all interconnected, my friend.
Yeah, it all connected. Because the very first film festival, the first public screening, I think we got accepted into the Festival of the Unseen before the film even came out. So that was significant because the very first public screening of the film was in Indrid Cold territory.
Wow.
The site of the very first Indrid Cold sighting. And they were having, and I was like, oh man, it'd be cool to go. They're having like an Indrid Cold after party at the festival.
That's crazy.
And you know how I said this hospital was known for births, like people being born there? Well, the number one reported ghost is like the doctor, like the guy that people would follow just to, give birth there. He died in the hospital. This festival took place on his birthday.
Goodness gracious.
And the reason we couldn't go to the Festival of the Unseen in Indrid Cold territory was because we had a prior commitment to attend a paranormal festival at the hospital in celebration of the doctor's birthday. And I was just like, what is going on?
How bizarre.
I'm glad I included that random Indrid mention because that was relevant. But yeah, every film festival is relevant.
Yeah, well, obviously, in fact, for a number of reasons, because again, I mentioned before we started that we did Hellier back in the day with Greg Newkirk, and Carl Pfeiffer came into MidWest WeirdFest, and of course Indrid Cold plays a massive part in that series.
Oh, absolutely.
And Alan Greenfield, who's a friend of mine, is obviously in that series as well, and he's the person where so much of the Indrid Cold data later comes through, kind of, even though it obviously starts beforehand. And Greenfield is also in my documentary, which is very strange.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
there are all these weird. There's like
that's
a
another
web
connection.
Yeah, there's a web.
That jogged a memory, because so at the end of the film, I'm not going to spoil what happened, but you know what I mean. You saw it. You know what happened at the end, and then there's
I won't spoil it for anyone.
Yeah, and then there's a little, like, the silver balloon with the stars on it. We saw that, and then we joked in the moment, because again, the film hasn't been completed yet, obviously, and we joked. We're like, so what? Are we just gonna throw in like a little Hellier Easter egg alongside a Indrid Cold? We can't have both, right? I'm like, who cares?
Why not?
So
we should send Alan Greenfield a screener of your film. I think he'd enjoy it. He's one of the I mean, there's an argument that perhaps all the very original first generation UFO guys are gone now, right? Like, Raymond Palmer and Donald Kehoe and all those kind of people. But Alan Greenfield is clearly second generation and knew all those first generation guys. So he understands the deep weirdness of not just ufology, but its interconnection with the type of things that you study. The paranormal isn't as divided as people often like to, mark it out to the different groups. The Spectre hunters are over here, and the Bigfoot people are over here, and the ufologists are over here. So yeah, I think Greenfield would enjoy your documentary. We should probably try to get him a screen. I know he'd watch it.
Yeah, I mean, that would be cool. I'd be worried, because I know he was talking a lot in especially in Hellier about like the cipher and like the numbers, and 93 is significant, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because I edited all this in apartment 93. So I remember that, when he was talking about that, I was like, oh, okay, well, that's my apartment number. Can we stop talking about the creepy things while I'm, finishing this creepy documentary? That's the thing, right? When you do documentary stuff, it's very rare. I mean, perhaps not so rare. I mean, what do I know? But it's rare when the line blurs of like, this is a movie, this is a film, but it's also, this is what we're doing, this is our lives, and also this is very real, and we put the film out there, and the weirdness only continues.
Yeah, I think there's something very profound to that type of approach to things, where the paranormal, and when I say that, I mean it's a broad umbrella again. I'm counting everything from cryptozoology through ufology to, to spectre hunting. I think there's a strange subjectivity to it that intersects even with popular culture. And one of my favorite authors is Lovecraft, and August Derleth, who's really the man who saved Lovecraft, worked on some Lovecraft notes to write the book The Lurker at the Threshold. So that's another popular culture interjection of this idea. And now there are people who talk about, I was talking with somebody recently on the show, I can't remember who it was now, but now there's people who talk about that they take the Lovecraft entity seriously. Like there are kind of cults that really think, the Necronomicon might be a real thing, and think Cthulhu might be a real thing. But if it's so subjective, if this is all subjective, like let's just say for a minute, the Guardian of the Threshold there might have been a strange, similar spiritual reality, but it kind of emerges out of Zanoni, out of Bulwer Lytton's writings. I don't think that makes it any less real or significant than something else, because I think all of this is so subjective, and I think we're feeding into whatever it is, and it's feeding into us, and our culture is intersecting with whatever spiritual reality is or isn't. It's so strange. And that's why, again, it becomes so fascinating with films like yours and with shows like Hellier, because then those shows themselves become part of the story. They become part of the mythology, and the cycle keeps going. Were
Especially
you
with
conscious
like
of that, though? Just quick, is that something you were conscious of, that you were becoming part of the cycle of the dweller on the threshold now?
I mean, like I was gonna say, like especially what you said, yes, and especially with something like the dweller, where so much of the interpretation is like your shadow self, like you were kind of hinting at earlier, like so much of it is, and I think that's part of the reason why it's has various interpretations, is because you have to put yourself into it, right? It's so personal, and you have to, even if you don't jive with an interpretation that it's a version of yourself that is a separate entity, it's still your initiation. It's still your experience, your greater experience that you're encountering this along. So yes, I wasn't conscious of that because I don't think while making it, but perhaps I have to separate myself from that while making it because I need to get this film done. If I'm gonna just keep waiting for the synchronicities and the weirdness to stop, like we would have to just, like I'd be making this film my whole life. There has to be an end. And I think that's why we had to kind of pair it with this juxtaposition of the self-initiation ritual that we did, because that's a ritual. It had a beginning, a middle, and end. Kind of left it as, did we get initiated? Did it work? We don't even know that. And the film has been out 6 months. We don't have the answers. We don't know yet. It's going to take time to figure out. We're still having all these weird things happen.
I love it, though, that you encounter this thing on your threshold, like on your movement to complete adult formation. Because I think they say you're not totally like psychologically formed until you're 25 or something like that, right? Like that's when you become who you are. You're not really who you are when you're 16. Or we all say, well, we're always the same. Not really. When you're 25, that's who you're probably going to be for the rest of your life. And it's the quarter century thing. So that you encounter this thing right on that cusp of, I guess, proper, I don't know, the rest of your life transformation. There's something very personal about that. It's something I liked about the film, actually, a lot.
I guess that just means I'm going to be a Midwest weirdo my whole life.
Well, yeah, that too. I'll tell you a funny story because we're talking about films at MidWest WeirdFest. You'll appreciate this, I think. When Greg Newkirk and Carl Pfeiffer came in, and it was so long ago, it was like the third episode of Talking Weird, and it was, so I think on Untold Radio now we're 130 something, but we'd already done like over 100 shows beforehand. Like the show's been going for like years and years and years now, but I think they were like the third episode, and we it's the only show I've ever recorded live in a podcast studio with the guests actually sitting kind of opposite me, which was super cool. But so they came in, we squeezed that under just before COVID hit, just before it really dropped. In fact, it was so early, people were kind of, just making jokes about it. It wasn't even taken seriously at all. People were flying in from all over still for the festival. So anyway, we screened the episode where they do the ritual to Pan in the cave. And when I watched that, because I'd already seen the show before they submitted. And I remember when I watched that episode in my living room here by myself, I was watching it and I was very conscious that a genuine ritual was playing out in almost real time, the way they kind of put it together. And I wasn't comfortable. I thought, I'm going to turn it off and then come back to it later so I'm breaking the ritual, which sounds kind of weird and superstitious, but still, right? I just didn't feel comfortable. There was, to me, this is before they'd even submitted. There was a palpable weirdness to that feeling. Anyway, that was the episode that we screened when they came to MidWest WeirdFest. And that was when COVID broke out. And I remember sending a Facebook message, or like I think I just tagged Greg in a message. I was like saying, ritual to Pan, panic, pandemic, like all these root words that come from Pan. I said, what did you guys actually do? I mean, literally a ritual to Pan played in how many hundreds of thousands of houses and in festivals like mine. And Pan is the root word of pandemic, or it's part of it, right? And then we get this COVID craziness. So anyway, I mean, it's just me being silly and intentionally superstitious, but it still seemed weirdly fitting that the year we did that was the year that the COVID thing like blew up afterwards. So very strange.
Wow. And the night of COVID too, because I remember that night, like the night before bleep hit the fan, we were out filming an investigation, and there's this like abandoned cemetery in the middle of the woods where they say this warlock was buried under the roots of this large sprawling tree, and if you lay in the open hole of the roots underneath, his spirit will come through you and fly up and show you his darkness. The crazy stuff, but we spent all night laying in this threshold of this very liminal space, and we were trying to summon this spirit, and then wake up the next morning. Oh, school's off? Wait, it's all online? What's happening? COVID? Wait, everyone's leaving? What's happening? What did we summon? So the same thing. It is like all that. It's weird stuff.
I mean, I do think and this is, again, it sounds woo-woo and mumbo jumbo-ish, but I do think to a degree we intersect with and perhaps encourage our reality more than we think. So who the devil knows? I mean, I don't know. It's like that wonderful episode of the X-Files talking about popular culture and things where Jose Chung's from outer space. Where have you seen that episode in season 3? It's probably the greatest X-Files episode where I think is it Mulder or somebody encounters the Air Force pilot who dresses up as a gray extraterrestrial to like hoax alien abductions, and then himself gets abducted in some diner, and he's like, I can't even tell you whether you're real. You know what I mean? So I think it's so strange. Reality melts so much. And it's one of the reasons you're probably not a regular viewer of this show, but I always give science such a hard time on this show. I'm saying that because I know Horace is watching, who's a scientist. Because
same with Sarah. Sarah studies, she was like anthropology, physics. She's a big physics girl. Now she works in hospitals, so she's big science, and it's always that debate of like, well,
yeah, I don't think it's going to get us there, man. I don't think science gets it. I think the world is way too weird. I think if science was going to get this, it would have got it by now, and it's not going to get it. It's too strange. It's like science is working here, and this is something where reality bends, and it's not something that you can quantify or qualify or replicate. It's not none of those things. It's not observable continuously or coherently the way that science likes something. And I think that's why it intersects with popular culture. I think it's why it intersects with imagination. And I'm not dismissing imagination. I mean it in perhaps the Henry Corbin sense, the great Islamic he wasn't Islamic, but he was somebody who studied Islamic and Eastern religious traditions. He talked about the imaginal realm. It was this space which somehow existed between our minds and between this other reality. It wasn't real. It wasn't unreal. And I think so much of this rolls out. And I think that's why we're seeing these interconnections between popular culture, like we're talking about, and between genuine experiential phenomena. Because I do think it's something which we don't understand how it works. And I think the quicker, at least we realize that it operates on a level that we can't plug science into, we mightn't get to an answer, but perhaps we'll get to a piece. What I mean? And
that too, that reminded me of, not to constantly bring it back to the film, but like that reminds me of another interpretation of the Dweller. Like if you're on the threshold of two realities, are you the Dweller? Are we the Dweller? That's Manly P. Hall. He said that Freemasons are the dwellers upon the threshold. So
it's fascinating.
That's one interpretation too. I mean, that's a whole separate. We couldn't go into everything, I want to include like the Lovecraft angle. But that's a whole nother tangent we could have gone down. And I like keeping things open. I like having just enough info where you know what's going on, but not enough where you feel like I don't want anyone to watch Dweller and be like, yes, that is case closed. I know everything there is to know about Dweller. These 25-year-olds just crack the case. I want to inspire people. I want people to be satisfied enough with what they saw, but intrigued enough to spend at least 2 or 3 times the length of the film doing their own research on it. Like you should be inspired to. Yeah, so things like the Lovecraftian angle. I feel like touching on the David Lynch, Twin Peaks, like that kind of covered that. When you discover that Lovecraft also talked about the lurker of the abyss, go down that rabbit hole. There's some good stuff there.
Again, I really like the fact that you as 25-year-olds don't think that you've come to the final answer. It wouldn't matter if you're 25 or 85, because what do any of us really have any ultimate answer on? But is this a case you think you'll ever revisit, whether in your own investigations or would there ever be a Dweller 2, for example, as a film?
Well, I'm about to drop something on you and you're going to be like, oh my God, you're dropping this at the end.
Wow.
We're almost out. But last week, I had a very, very, very terrifying dream. And I encountered the Dweller in my dream last week. And it was the most terrifying dream. I actually woke up my entire apartment building just by screaming. And I've never done that before. We did record afterwards, like a little sit down. I was talking about it, and we'll probably post that as like a podcast or something at some point soon. But your point being, I don't think we're done with, the implications of that are, is it that we didn't face the Dweller? Is it, we encountered it, but did we actually face it? Or is this a different obstacle to overcome? Are we on the threshold of something else? There's so many implications and so many different ways to interpret this potential additional experience. If this is encountering it again, is it even the same entity? Is it even the same thing? I have this framework now. Initially it was like, what is this thing? We went into a spiral of what is it? Now I had a framework of it. So I, instead of waking up scared, once I calmed down, I just was like, F you, I'm not stopping, Dweller. But it was sort of that mentality, but still, that's a good question, because I don't think we'll ever be done with it. Even when or if we stop having experiences with a Dweller, or there comes a point, it's like we can't, no pun intended, dwell on one part of a initiatory experience we had. Let's say 10 years from now, it's like, are we still talking about a self-initiation we had 10 years ago? At that point, it's like, did we ever learn anything from? Did we ever move on? There's going to be new experiences to be had. So I don't think this specific experience that we had, I think it's just going to be a part of how we view ongoing investigations and things that we encounter here on out. I think it's just a framework to interpret and continue to experience these things moving forward. I don't think there's going to be a direct sequel. I think as these experiences continue to happen, we're going to talk about it online. We're going to, come on shows potentially and talk about them and follow up interviews and stuff. But I don't think there's going to be a direct sequel. Projects we do moving forward, I think, are going to reference it and just be a part of the framework in our approach moving forward. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And maybe even if you ever think you're done with the Dweller doesn't think it's done with you.
Yeah.
Which is even more terrifying. What are your next projects, though? Is there anything you can share with us that you're excited about that's on the horizon that you're making or going to make?
Yeah, we have 2 kind of main projects that we're kind of settling into production mode on. One of them is a Sarah full director debut. She's leading up a project about time, which is going to be really fascinating to explore the implications of the past, present, and future, and time loops, how those work.
Oh, wow.
At a a couple very well-known haunted properties.
Just quickly, if you do a time thing, if you're doing a time documentary, you should talk to Tim Swartz, who is one of the hosts of the Paracast with Gene Steinberg, because he wrote a fascinating book on time issues and time loops and time strangeness. And I've had him on Talking Weird. He's also in my documentary. He's a fascinating guy. So if you're doing a weird time thing, you should grab an interview with Tim Schwartz. I'm more than happy to hook you up.
Oh no, I would love that. We're actually in mode right now trying to land as many interviews and stuff as possible. So that would be awesome.
Oh no, I'm happy to do it. So yeah, so that was one of them, the time one, and you said there were two.
And then fun winter project I've just been chipping away at with my girlfriend. We our apartment is super haunted. Well, I don't know if it's the apartment or it's us or our collection of weird haunted objects. A combination of all three, perhaps. So it's been fun just kind of telling the story of our what it's like living in a haunted apartment.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah, so it's just been a fun thing. You know, when we're in the mood, we'll record, little bits with the objects. We'll do some investigating. We actually met a composer at one of the last festivals we did, and it's so cool. He's a graduate student. His whole thing is he creates music from objects, and he's created like horror movie soundscapes and stuff for horror movies and horror games. And he came over a couple months ago, and he turned our haunted objects into haunted instruments, and he got so many sounds out of these things I didn't even know were possible. So he's creating this whole soundscape, which is really cool because the whole thing is like, hey, we're going to talk to our haunted objects and kind of treat them as characters in this film. And now the characters are actually speaking, if that makes sense. Like it's weird. It's a weird way to think about it, but like their voices are being heard throughout, and you don't even know it.
That sounds fascinating. I can't wait to see that project.
Yeah. So those are just two of the main things we're kind of working on.
No, they both sound great. And I have another question for you now before we go, because we can go a little over if we have to, is when you talk then about your apartment might be haunted or you might be haunted, do you think that people can be haunted? Do you think sometimes it's a person more than a place that attracts whatever this energy or whatever these things are?
Good question. I'm just going to say, I think I can only speak for us. I think we attract weird things. I'd like to explore that further. I think if that's universal. I mean, Dean, do you think you attract weirdness?
I myself don't think that I do really, although I've had experiences when I was younger. But I think some people do. I do think that some people are more plugged into whatever the other is. And I know that John Keel, who is somebody that has been a big influence on me. I was lucky enough to meet and spend a little time with Keel before he passed. I think he wrote somewhere the idea that some people might be like umbrellas as well. So if you're a haunted person and there are other people near you, they might fall under your umbrella and experience these things as well. I think Keel wrote that. I might be wrong, but that makes some sense to me. I mean, that makes as much sense to me as a place being haunted. Not that I'm saying a place can't be, but I do think some people either attract or become more aware or intersect or interact more with the other. And it might make sense that if you're in that person's sphere, that you too then might become a witness or an experiencer of this type of strangeness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, especially if you're continuously inviting the weird, when you're literally inviting it into your home. Like that's another thing, we do all these ghost hunts, public ghost hunts, and people come out and the number one question, they want to hear about our scariest experience, but they never want to encounter it on their own. And they always ask, nothing's going to follow me home, right? They never want to take it home with them. And we're continually inviting it into our home. And in reaching out to these things all the time. So is that invitation, is it at what point is it us making the call to them and then making the call to us? I think about that often.
Yeah, I do think if you intentionally engage whatever it is, and if it becomes aware of you, it's probably, why wouldn't it? Do you know what I mean? Like, why wouldn't it then want to interact more with you than if it's just a normal guy or gal who, you know, works a 9 to 5, or in America it's more often 8 to 5 these days, or later it seems, but works a normal kind of, you know, sluggish job, and then comes home and watches Netflix and passes out and gets up and rinse and repeat for their whole life and doesn't think about the other. It doesn't mean the other won't bump into them sometimes, but if you're somebody who's out there actively trying to engage the other, then it makes sense that the other is sometimes going to become aware of you as well and attracted to you and want to engage with you because you poked it. It just makes sense. I don't think that's even that weird an idea, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that weird of an idea until you're talking about like you attracting weird thing, and then when it becomes about you, you're like, okay, that's weird, you know. But when you talk about it as someone else, it's like, yeah, as a third party objective witness, that doesn't sound weird at all.
Well, Ben, you were an amazing guest. I can't wait to have you on stage. I can't wait to screen dwell for starters at MidWest WeirdFest. And I encourage people to go to MidWestWeirdFest.com if you're anywhere near Eau Claire, Wisconsin, to come to the festival, particularly come and see Ben's film, because he's going to be there, and Sarah's going to be there as well, and your photographer's going to be there too, right?
Yep. So the three of us are going to be there, and yeah, I know Sarah sends her regards. She unfortunately works at this hour. She works night shifts in a hospital, so when she's not at haunted abandoned hospital, she spends her nights in a real thriving hospital. She can't escape those hospitals, but she put in PTO and can't wait to come to the MidWest WeirdFest. We're going to be there and can't wait to meet you in person, Dean, and everyone else that comes on out.
Man, we're going to have so much fun. And where can people go to see what you're up to and see more about your projects, Ben?
Yeah, you can find us on pretty much anything: Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Afterlife Road Productions. And if it's easier for you just to go to afterliferoadproductions.com, you can reach us there. You can shoot us a message on any of the platforms or an email at afterliferoadproductions@gmail.com.
And I think I have already, and I'll make sure it is in the show notes, the Afterlife Productions web address, so people can just click on it. But Ben just gave it to you if you're only listening. Ben, it was a great joy having you as a guest on Talking Weird. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Man, and hold on after the show, because I will come back to you once we've said goodbye to everybody. And until I talk to you, though, Ben, in probably a minute, until I talk to everybody else out there, please keep it weird.